What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of California Underground. Tonight is a unique night because it's the first ever roundtable discussion. It's been about 2 weeks since the recall election. Figure it gave people enough time to kind of calm their emotions a little bit and kind of let the dust settle on the results and all that. And really talk about like where we're going from here. Because I've said before, there's a lot to look forward to in 2022, and there's still a lot of work to be done, even though the recall wasn't successful. And I'll get started with introductions. So you've seen Brian with me before. We've chatted a lot. He's running for Congress in the 45th District against Katie Porter. So looking forward to getting his commentary on like races and where that's going in 2022. And then also joining for the first time is Cynthia. How do you pronounce your last name, Cynthia?
It's Cowie.
Cowie. Okay. I think I butchered it on my live, so I apologize for that. She's involved in the California School Choice Foundation. You've been a content creator for, what was it, Latinos for
America First.
America First. Also involved in a whole bunch of different campaigns, basically a political activist down here in San Diego. So we're just going to chat a little bit about what happened first with the recall. What are the numbers that we saw? Brian did an incredible job keeping me informed throughout the entire election, even early voting and all that stuff. I think you kind of saw the writing on the wall, Brian.
I didn't at first. We had predictions, and my predictions were way wrong, but I saw it unraveling before our eyes, unfortunately.
Yeah, you'd been sending me a lot of stuff, and you kind of said that they got out to a big lead like right away. And the more you sent me, the more I was starting to get a little dismayed about like what was going to happen with the recall, because it wasn't looking good in Orange County right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think it was going to be. Well, firstly, thanks for having me, and I know that me and Cynthia have been on Instagram as well. So nice to meet you virtually. I didn't think it was going to be as bad as it was. I mean, they're still counting. I don't know where the exact. I don't know if you have a number on where they're at now. The yes to no breakdown. I thought I was getting closer to a 40-60. But
according to Cal Matters, which updated their information as of 6:30 tonight, it was still 51.7% no in Orange County, with 1.134 million.
Yeah, I was talking statewide. So yeah, Orange County is a major disappointment.
Yeah.
Besides, I will say in my district, which I for better or for worse, I take credit for, because we did a lot of work. We spent a lot of money. It was the first time that we turned out more Republicans than Democrats since 2016, which was the last election that we won in that district. So we did a lot of work in the mailbox, going door to door, on the phone, trying to get people out. But yeah, we saw all the writing on the wall for Orange County with the in-person voting, and everybody has their own theory statewide why the recall failed. And I talked about it in a post on my Instagram. And I know me and you have discussed it a little bit. We discussed it a little bit the night of on my live with a few other people. We all went through the traumatizing event together of how bad it was right when we got the first results. But, our voters didn't show up to vote for the most part. My district's maybe an outlier where we actually, outperformed past elections, with the exception of maybe the Latino vote, which is now gearing more towards being conservative or voting conservative, not only nationwide, but even in California. Slowly it's starting to go to the right. So there are good signs. My district, competitive seat next year, we got to take back. Latinos starting to consider conservatives more. That'll, I think if we continue on that trend, the state might actually be competitive, albeit in 15 to 20 years. it'll be very, maybe a swing state by then if we continue on that track. But yeah, a disappointing night for us, but some things to learn, I think.
Yeah, and so the number you asked about statewide is it's 62%, 62.1 no out of 12.6 million votes cast so far. Yeah. And the final total for, I know the guy you endorsed, Larry Elder, was 48.3%, and he got 3.5 million votes.
Okay.
I don't remember what John Cox's total was in 2018, if it was more than that, but that's a pretty fair showing for a guy who entered the race pretty quickly. So Cynthia, you were doing some work. You're doing some work with Latinos for America First. And Brian just brought up a point about how Hispanics are starting to trend more conservative in California. Do you see that as like a trend that's going to continue in California, or like is that a demographic that Republicans and GOP really should be going after? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So Latinos for America First, it's an organization that's nationwide. So we have, different coalitions. I'm one of the 2 members that are in California, and a lot of organizations based in Texas. And then we have some coalitions in Florida. I'll be honest, it's focused more on like some national levels, and those coalitions, they have their own state initiatives. But as a general, like as far as like the conservative apparatus on, demographics to really focus on, in particular in California, if I'm not mistaken, it's 51 or 52% Hispanic. And I'm in no way saying that we shouldn't be, as far as like a strategy for us as conservatives and Republicans, that Hispanics are the only people we should be targeting. But I do think it's an area of opportunity, as a whole, because if we're speaking in particular for California politics, I think that's a big area of opportunity. And I think, that is something, to be considered as far as like that voter turnout and, how Hispanics viewed Newsom, in contrast to, his original gubernatorial race.
Do you think any of the candidates did a really good job reaching out to the Latino vote? And that's a question to both of you, if you want to chime in.
Sorry, you can go ahead.
Sorry. I think when it comes to critiquing candidates overall, like I think, it should be like a nuanced approach. It should be for all of them. I was, to full disclosure, I was a recall signature gatherer, and I was involved in all the phases as far as promoting the first question a lot, emphasizing that a lot more. And then, obviously, as a signature gatherer, I had a vested interest in who is governor. And for me, I voted Kevin Kiley for question 2, and I was part of his campaign. So, I was behind the scenes for that. I think, definitely as far as the critique, there could have been more, approaches to that. I'll be honest, his approach was more of like a grassroots. So there was a lot of different forums and areas of opportunity for him to meet voters as a whole. There was never really huge emphasis on the coalitions of who is who. So, as far as like a marketing approach on targeting Hispanics, I don't think there was a concentrated effort on that. I could say, openly for that. As far as overall, like the other candidates, I didn't necessarily see it, just, on the eyes looking end. So that's just my perspective.
Okay.
I was going to say, I put it out in my post today, which was like what I thought should be the 5 steps forward, as conservatives. And we were at a period of time in the late 2000s, early 2010s. I was in college at the time, but, me and a lot of the other college Republicans were thinking of ways where the party could rebuild itself then. I called it a rebuild then. It truly is a rebuild now. Like, after the recall result and, what's transpired really since 2013, especially in Orange County, we lost half our seats. We grabbed 2 back in the U.S. House 2 years, or I guess technically last November, almost a year ago. But that was because of a $12 million spending spree on each race in DC. That really wasn't because of what we did here in California. And a lot of people think that was because of identity politics, Young Kim and Michelle Steele, although they didn't really mention their identity. So I think one thing that I heard from a lot of people in the recalls, like they said Latinos will never vote for Larry Elder because he's black, and like some crazy things that Latinos won't vote for black people, which I think is just absurd. And these are people that were really involved with some of the campaigns. And we have to get outside this thought process of like, you have to have a Latino run for a Latino to vote for that candidate. I mean, Donald Trump has said some pretty crazy stuff. I think we all can agree. And he won the Latino vote down in Miami-Dade, right? So this thought process, while identity can be a benefit if you at least bring it out in your story, but, we're seeing, candidates in 2022 literally just say their race, vote for me. Like that's their selling point, is their race. And I thought we had that in the recall a little bit too much with some of the candidates. They didn't outwardly always say it. Some of them did, but some of the people working for them said that person will never win because of their race. They have to be a Latino. A Latino will get the Latino vote. It's like, this is not how it ever worked. It's about what you stand for and your message. Look at Hillary Clinton. It's not like she got like an absurd amount of female votes as a female candidate for president. Look at Harris. She's not exactly popular in California, and she checks off some of the census check boxes that the left wants. So I thought if you look at Larry's output in terms of how many voters he brought to the table in a short period of time, 8 weeks of campaigning, he did have a broad coalition of voters, and he never talked about his race unless it was the LA Times making ridiculous claims that he was the black face of white supremacy. He would be able to ring off statistics, for certain populations, which he could obviously go to those communities, I think, in a general election and maybe win, maybe a little bit more percentage wise of those groups by actually taking his story of growing up in South Central. That's his story. Once again, it's not his identity necessarily. It's part of his story, his background. He's much more than that. He's a successful person. So that's my concern going forward. Have we learned? Because back in the early 2010s, I don't mean to rattle on about this. Like, we literally doubled down on identity politics. All these seats where you had 10 to 20% Asian populations, but like 80% white, or or in some black districts, you had Asian candidates, because we really tried to shove that down everybody's throat that you should just vote for someone based on what they look like. And now we're kind of dealing with the ramifications of it, I feel.
Just a side note to everyone who's tuning in, we will be taking some questions. So I see all you people talking in the chat. We'll be taking questions a little bit later. Was there any big surprise outside of, like, I think for me personally, the margin of which the recall failed was the biggest shocker to me? Was there anything that you saw, like whether it was like county wise or I don't know, anything that jumped out at you about the recall that you were like, wow, that was not what I was expecting? So whoever wants to jump in.
Before we move on to that, I just wanted to elaborate and, definitely add on to Brian's point as well, as far as identity politics, since we're going there, the purity test, I don't know if it's along more of like the race point, but I've definitely seen a lot of different, illustrations as far as what an ideal perfect candidate would be. One in particular being like they had to be married and have children, and, and my whole thing is, along with identity politics, who is to say that the perfect ideal politician is supposed to be a family person? And so if we're talking about coalitions, what we are seeking in our politicians, where do we go after the recall? I think we should be open-minded to people that are in different seasons of life. If we want fresh ideas, and if we are welcoming people from different age demographics, they might be in a season of life where they're not married or don't have children, and you have no idea why they don't have children. So, I just wanted to, kind of add on to Brian's point as far as like playing on identities politics. Aside from race, it's also, the different age brackets and where they are in life as well. As far as like surprises, to be honest, like, again, as a recall person, like I was the type of person where, I'm going to be all hands on deck. I'm going to see where the chips fall at the election night. So naturally, like, I'm not going to see ground or have a defeatist attitude until the election night. But I was very well aware that, this was going to be an uphill battle. I was aware that we were outspent. And I was aware that, we obviously, as Republicans, we had to turn out. But in addition to that, we had to make sure that we were reaching out and had a concentrated effort on those non-party preferences and the Democrats. I know there were a lot of Democrats in support of the recall. Now, that being said, I was a little bit surprised, though, just about the Republican turnout. And I knew that, if the recall did fail, I know a big part of it would have been the Republican turnout. So I would say, my initial reaction, I definitely was disappointed as far as the margin. I thought it should have been closer, at least in the 50%, not in the 60s, as far as the no question.
Yeah, I was thinking it was definitely going to be, I think, Brian and I had that live a couple weeks before, and I said, like, one of my predictions, which I guess I didn't realize the rules of the game. One of the predictions was that it was going to fail by 5%, but it was going to galvanize enough people to believe, wow, it's pretty close. And like, you know, Noodles is in danger because there's that many people who don't like him. But the fact that it got blown out of the water by so much, I think only emboldened him a little bit more rather than humbled him. Someone had asked me that, do you think it humbled him? And I said, I think it probably emboldened him. And I think you're seeing that with the way he's signing all these laws that were sitting on his desk, like radical gun control laws and handing over your information. And just he's going on a signing spree right now. What about you, Brian? What was a surprise you saw in the recall results?
I won't put that, not a prediction, but a possibility, and put it out there that if we go back to this, you know, whenever, and you guys can tell me no one's really told me I was wrong about any of my predictions, thankfully. But Newsom might have to appoint somebody to that U.S. Senate seat. If people are saying Feinstein's not going to make it to 24, that's what I'm hearing. And I would not be surprised if he appoints himself. I don't know constitutionally what that would do in California. But, you know, he's got a lieutenant governor that he could brag about her being ready. So, you know, I don't think the Democrats like him too much. Believe it or not, they voted for him because they were scared of Republicans. So just put that on your radar. In terms of surprises, I was surprised by the margin, but not incredibly surprised. I had seen the turnout. I was more surprised by the reaction on our side. The Democrats were quiet about the victory. They went on about their life. No one really said anything. They're like, okay, our job's done. But almost immediately, it was just fraud. And it was from a lot of the candidates that had run, which to me tells me that they didn't have any idea what they were getting themselves into, which I already knew, but like they didn't even calculate the numbers and like understand that this thing could have blown up this bad if we didn't turn out our voters. And a lot of those candidates, admittedly, they kind of like hurt our turnout by telling people to only vote in person with certain types of ink and all these stupid things that like, we got to like, I don't care how people vote. If they had to vote on papyrus or whatever, whatever method they have, like I could give a crap. So I was surprised by that. I was surprised by how much people started thinking about 2022, considering we just got punched in the face by, at the time, it was 30% deficit. I guess it's going to be closer to 20. I think I said that night, no one in the top 10 has any business running. I don't think really anybody should run. Elder, you can maybe make an argument for if he has more time. Faulkner, you could maybe make an argument for if he runs as like a moderate and if he doesn't do any damage to people like me down the ticket. But other than that, like, I always say after a tough loss like that, with a lot of these candidates that didn't even get, you know, 0.5% of the vote, like they should go on vacation like Larry did. Larry went on vacation. He's kind of clearing his head. Like if you got like totally, you know, run over in the results, you should probably take a break before you decide to start campaigning again. But we've seen some of these people already start, and I don't get it. I really don't. But that's what I'm surprised by, like the crazy claims already of fraud, even though there was not enough proof to flip 3 million votes at the time. And then how quickly some of these people, how poorly they reacted that ran, and how they're already thinking about putting themselves through this again after getting annihilated.
Yeah, I think, you know, to touch upon your what you said about the fraud issue, and I talked about this yesterday on Coffee in California Politics. I personally can't stand the fraud or that he cheated excuse, because you could say that there was fraud because every election has, I don't know, someone fills out a ballot that they're not supposed to, or something happened. I mean, to say there's no fraud is factually inaccurate, but to say there was so much fraud that that's how Newsom won was because he cheated, I don't buy that. The numbers just aren't in our favor. And that was the bottom line, is that they knew how many people, and that's something we have to get better at, is understand that politics is a numbers game. And Brian, you're very good at this. You understand that there's a certain amount of votes out there that you're trying to get, and you can statistically analyze, well, if I get this many here and I get this many here, I win the election. And I mean, that's how they call races. That's how they know this stuff happens before. And everyone's like, well, how did they call it so early? Well, because they know how many votes are left and they know how many people they got. So I think that there's...
Can I jump on that for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was talking to a donor this week, and she had taken time to volunteer, and and I agree with what you're saying about, calling races. We've talked about this because there's such a big deficit, but some of those people were still in line when they called it, or they were still counting and they didn't appreciate the way the media, was so quick to do it. I get both sides of that a little bit more now, because there've been people that were right there counting, like, why are we counting if you're already calling it? Kind of like an attitude. I totally get kind of both sides. Although I think the people arguing about that, they think there's still a chance somehow miraculously that you'd come up with those ballots. Anyways, I just want to interject with that. I have seen a more credible argument for not calling races so quickly.
I understand that, but I think anybody who says, and I know this probably won't go over, this will go over like a fart in church, an audit of the election is not going to do anything. Like, I'm sorry to burst your bubble. You can run an audit of the recall election. It's not going to change the outcome. It's not like all of a sudden they're going to say, oh, actually he lost by 2 million votes and that's it. So, that's my personal feeling about it. I know people push back on it and they don't like when I say stuff like that, but I just think we got to get better at politics overall when it comes to what's going on here in California. Maybe that's a good segue into, like, we need to get better at politics and what we're doing in 2022. So looking ahead, Brian, you put out a post about what you think in the 5 points. And Cynthia, we've talked about stuff about what, maybe party platform, propositions, what we can touch upon, all that. So whoever wants to jump in first. Cynthia, we haven't heard from you, so let's jump in with you first about what your thoughts are moving forward.
Sure. So before we pivot to that, as far as the audit, I do want to reiterate, even though they're still counting votes, the election, has until October 22nd to get certified. I do see some comments there and some questions about that. So I did want to address it. Even if with the amount of votes still left to count, it will not change the results. Newsom will still be governor. So, it wouldn't matter about that. So I do want to, answer, some comments on that. And then, before pivoting as well, like as far as, election integrity, I think it would kind of be great to end this part of the conversation on a positive note. So on Twitter, I do have my username on there, and it's the pinned tweet that I have. And my pinned tweet is, I don't know who needs to hear this, but until we flip 6 assembly seats and 2 California Senate seats, we are not going to be changing the election laws. Instead of clutching our invisible pearls, we should be donating and volunteering for the 22 campaigns. So, as far as, that is concerned, like, nothing can really be done about election integrity or things of that nature until we start flipping seats. And I think having that platform and, moving forward and what we could do for 2022, is a great opportunity for that. As far as different propositions, and I think what's been proven, for this recall and kind of emphasizing, Brian's recent Instagram post, I believe it was like the third or the second one. One of the points that he covers is basically, it's an area of opportunity where we can see how these kind of statewide elections is a very, very far stretch for us. But we do have areas of opportunity with ballot initiatives. And I think that this recall, and I think even before 2020, I think our politicians statewide and localwide have kind of proven that they're not willing to really do anything as far as things that's going to actually help us and what's important for California voters. And so one beautiful opportunity, what's great and unique to California and what isn't unique for a lot of states in the country, is the opportunity to put different ballot initiatives. So the one that, I'll speak very openly about, I'm a volunteer for the California School Choice Foundation. We recently rebranded to be called the Californians for School Choice, just because, for donation purposes, that's, our PAC for that. And that initiative in particular is going to be tackling one of the number one issues that I think has garnered a lot of different support, after the events of 2020, and it's school choice. So what that specific ballot initiative focuses on creating an education savings account for every child in California. And this would be, great for all students from different walks of life. And it's also, we don't discriminate based off of income. We don't discriminate based off of which form of education you want to be. It's going to benefit each child, regardless of which education route we can take. If you go on YouTube for Recall Gavin, they do weekly town halls. They're going to be rebranding themselves as Rebuild California. This was the organization by Mike Netter and Orrin Heatley. They were the main proponents of the recall. They're going to be spearheading a lot of different other ballot initiatives along, with, school choice initiative. And there is one, if you go to their YouTube and watch their town hall that they had last night, there is a water initiative to kind of, target that specific one. So yes, it's great for agriculture, but that would also tackle like the housing issue as well, because water plays an issue on like housing as well. So I think, that's one area of opportunity for us moving forward in 2020 is focusing on those, our statewide and our local wide elections, along with these ballot initiatives that's unique to California.
Yeah, one thing, going back to 2020, no, right? 2020 with the propositions, I'm like, what year is it? And that's what happens with COVID. You just have no idea what year it is anymore. Going back to 2020 with all the propositions, it was very interesting. And this is a big silver lining for me, is a lot of propositions, the vote results fell pretty conservatively when you looked at them. It was kind of shocking to see like a blue state like California voted against taxes. It voted against like more regulations and more bureaucracy. So that's sort of a weird thing to me, is that the voters, when they're proposed with like conservative solutions, approve them when they're a proposition or vote down stuff that is not conservative. But when it comes to like Republicans or Democrats, they're just like, oh, I'm going to vote for the Democrat and put them in the legislature, and they'll end up passing more rules, more regulation, more bureaucracy, more taxes, and all that stuff. So I always find that interesting, is seeing how the propositions will fall.
And there was a proposition also on affirmative action as well, which also is a silver lining in that maybe Californians aren't into identity politics as much as we make it out to be as well. So I do agree with that.
Yeah. School choice, I think, is definitely going to be big, especially with COVID. I think it's like the ripe time for school choice to be on the ballot. And I think you're going to see a lot of parents probably get into a ballot initiative like this. So that one's definitely one I'm going to keep my eye on, especially with the grip the teachers union has here in California. So Brian, flipping the question over to you, I forgot what the question was. Looking forward into 2022.
Nice host.
What are some?
Kidding.
I mean, besides you have your campaign coming up in 2022, you haven't stopped working. So what are you seeing in your campaign, in your district, and then maybe anything else that you're seeing in 2022 that you want to talk about?
Well, I think you guys mentioned a few things that already that I think I can piggyback on. I think talking about how propositions are more digestible for California voters is important, but I also think the same thing would happen with candidates if you have good candidates. If you look statewide and like if you had to say like, okay, what's a good elected official? You might be kind of scratching your head for a while. I started looking at some of the materials that I put it up on the post that Mike Garcia put out there. He like I said, you have to learn from the Trump era. People don't want career politicians, but they also want like a new conservative message. And I thought that he was like his messaging, and I think some of the stuff I do as well on my campaign, like kind of like talk about the Reagan Republicanism that we all probably more fall in lines with, but kind of putting like a new twist on it. That's important. That's more appealing to California voters. It also makes it harder for the left to kind of just paint you as this crazy white supremacist Nazi, make America great again flag, all over the place, crazy guy. Even though I don't agree with all that.
So if I could jump in, what is a Reagan Republican? Because I feel like it's been 35, 40 years since Reagan has been president. What would you call a Reagan Republican at this point? Because it's probably been changed and modified by everybody in the past 35, 40 years.
Well, I mean, I think if you look, I'll kind of give my last debate that I had against my Republican opponents an example here in a second, but it's that recognition that government is the problem. Government's in the way. We would all be better off if the government. It's more like a libertarian view, almost like when you think back, like the way that Reagan spoke. It was like he spoke like a modern day libertarian, but also very, I would say, at the time, maybe not as private life, but publicly, he was very socially conservative as well. So, the one good thing about being conservative is that you do have a wide spectrum of voters. We have the libertarians, we have the Tea Party Republicans, we have the Trump Republicans. You even have like the Romney, unfortunately, to some people, Republicans, where you don't know if they're always consistent on their values. But how that compares back to my race is we had a debate recently, and Mike Netter was moderating. There was four of us candidates out there, and he acted. I would consider Mike a friend. Me and him talk, but some of the candidates I don't think had communicated him with them very much, but he gets really fired up if you guys ever heard him speak. He said, "This is going to be a tough question, Brian. I'm going to go to you." And he's pointing. He's like, "How are you going to bring more money to UCI or to your district in general?" And I said, "I'm not. That's not my job. You're not electing me to go to DC and spend more money. We're going to spend ourselves into oblivion." While all the other candidates said, "Yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to bring more money back to the district." Like, no, that's not what you're voting for me for. Like that kind of thinking. Like, yeah, if there's something small that I can bring back to my district as part of a bill, and that's going to already be spent anyways, yeah, maybe I'll advocate for it, but I'm not going there just to spend money nilly-willy. That's the Reagan approach. We don't have to spend the money. The government is the problem. The government keeps on overextending itself. So I think COVID was a really good example of that, and it is now. Like, look at the government overextend itself, trying to make all these mandates when it's as simple as just let people live their lives. And we've caused a lot of unnecessary fear. So anyways, that's the way that propositions are utilized. Candidates can market themselves in ways that are similarly appealing to the 75% of the electorate. And in my district, I think I'll be able to do that really effectively. Most people, and you mentioned it with how people don't want to raise their own taxes. Like California is still fairly conservative. And there's a reason why a lot of Democrats are even moving out, because they don't want, like a lot of celebrity Democrats are moving out because they don't want to pay the taxes. So it's a reality. Like we all don't want to pay taxes. So instead of avoiding that reality, we should just really highlight it. Like the government is the problem and freedom is the answer.
So how do you take that message, make it a message that applies in 2021? And it's no secret that you're kind of just rearranging the chairs on the Titanic if you're going to the same districts over and over again, trying to scrape up votes. Like, oh, if we just keep going back to the central, and this is a critique I always had of John Cox when he ran 2018. He got the nomination, and then he won the primary to run, and he just ran off to the Central Valley, and you never saw him again because he's like, oh, I'm just going to collect votes in the Central Valley. How do you get that message? One, how do you change that message to make it more 2021 applicable? And two, how do you start to chip away in cities like LA or San Francisco, or San Diego is still pretty purple, so there's still a good chance that you could make some ground here in San Diego.
Well, I would say, like I said, you have to learn from the Trump era. So they don't like career politicians. You need, just talk about how people feel in their everyday. I talk about how I relate to people in their everyday struggles. I live below the poverty line, so I know what it's like. California has factory workers. They have agricultural workers. They have police officers that are being alienated. We have teachers that don't even feel comfortable with some of the stuff that's going on. Talking about your movement, like how I do, representing everybody, a working class movement is, and saying the government is the problem. We're going to get the government. That's bringing kind of Trumpism into Reaganism, in my opinion, John Cox, I don't want to really use him as an example for anything, especially after the Bear. But even statewide races, like there's a lot, like I like Eric Early. He's a really good candidate, I think. But these races aren't really where our focus needs to be. They need to be on local races, state races, and the federal races we can pull back. So I don't want to use John Cox as an example for anything except what not to do.
Yeah, he's a good example of what not to do. Go ahead, Cynthia.
I think, kind of, in line with Brian's points as well. Obviously, for him as a congressional candidate, his specific policy proposals are going to be really unique to his potential constituents and those, that live in his district. And then, the same could say for those that are potentially running for state assembly. Your policies and things that are important to your potential constituents are going to be unique as well. I think overall, though, like statewide and even local wide, like as far as possibilities to reach across party lines or things that I think impact everyone from all walks of life, is really hammering on kitchen table issues that are really unique, that impact all Californians. So if I had to make like a bullet point list on like the top 5 things that I think impact all Californians that at least would pique people's interest and have people care. Number 1, I would, in no particular order, 1 is school choice. 1 is the environment. And when I say environment, I mean like water, fires, agriculture. 3rd is homelessness. 4th is public safety, so rising crime. And the 5th would be the high cost of living, so taxes, university. So I think as far as like what to look for 2022, but I think anyone that's running for office, like those 5 things are probably the things that everyone really should be focusing on.
I forgot to say it when I was giving my spiel about John Cox. Are you guys frozen? You guys aren't frozen. Okay, you guys were just not moving. I thought you were frozen for a second when I looked up. 2022 will be decided, or there will be 2 issues that are at the forefront. School choice is obviously kind of intertwined in this, but it'll be critical race theory. Everyone's going to talk about it. I think you're going to find some Republicans that have softer stances. And we talked about purity tests, but I do think critical race theory is something you do need to have a purity test on. And if we kind of waver on that, and I can already see it coming. I see it in people in multiple races, and some of these candidates, how they plan to run their race down the middle, and they think that means being open to critical race theory. I think most people in the middle don't want that taught to their children, so that's not the way to go. And then this whole, you'll see Republicans and Democrats, they'll package, with law enforcement, they'll try to say police reform, police reform, police reform. You'll have people that try to run down the middle and say that they support police reform, which I think is not a electable position in most districts, but it definitely isn't going to help you in a Republican primary, because you're in a position where you're supposed to support law enforcement. And every time Nancy Pelosi talks about anything with the police, it's police reform, which usually she has members that want to defund the police or reallocate resources to social workers or whatever, which I'm actually not against having more, people that are specialized in, say, like homelessness, that might have a social work background, but I don't want it to go at the detriment of, the need for more police officers.
And critical race theory. I'm sorry, Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to touch upon the point of like the critical race theory in schools, and maybe this is something Republicans just need to get better at, learning how to pivot and takes those points. And I brought this up, like you can't argue with a Democrat in their critical race theory frame. You have to almost pivot the entire argument and say, like, if you're going to talk about critical race theory in school, a Republican candidate, and this is free advice, Brian, if you ever use it, I won't charge you for it, is just pivot from critical race theory in a school, say, well, instead of talking about critical race theory, and let's talk about the real racial injustice of public schools and how school choice can help solve those racial inequalities and how it benefits more inner city children, more minority children in inner cities. And it's been like Republicans have to get better at switching the whole argument to points that are more on their side. And I don't think Republicans across the nation outside of Trump really did a good job of that, of framing the argument how they want to frame it. That helps.
I agree with you, and I'll just have a quick comment on that. Is that most people they don't know what critical race theory is until it's already in the classroom. So I agree with your pivot that you're saying. You're talking about how school choice solves the problem of inequities, but the other problem is that most people don't know until it's too late. So the left is going to try that critical race theory is just talking about our history in general, and we don't talk about it already, which that's not what it is. Critical race theory is saying everything is institutionalized racism, every system is racist, and that's, you even have some people on the left that are pushing back on this now. There's a really good interview with Bill Maher and Ben Shapiro and another individual where they're arguing about critical race theory, where Ben Shapiro and Bill Maher end up being on the same team. It's a really crazy interview, so I encourage you to watch it.
Bill Maher has been all over the place, and it's funny you bring up how like institutional racism, when school choice can actually break down the institutional racism of public schooling. And Cynthia, I mean, I'm just kind of going off the little bit that I've read. Can you like back up anything about how school choice does help inner city children and all that, and how that could be used as a beneficial argument in 2022?
No, absolutely. And to kind of hammer on that point as far as CRT, and this is just my personal private opinion, I think it's too generous of a term. I think it's cultural and social Marxism. I think CRT is really too generous. But that's me, loving politics, and I agree as far as like how that can.
Well, now it's your public opinion because.
Yeah, now it's a public opinion.
Now it's a public. It's not really private anymore, but.
Yeah, but as far as facing inequities for school choice, California is 49th in the state as far as educational outcomes. Most children in high schools, they don't read and understand math at their grade levels. So I think, that to me, that's discrimination across, all party lines and all race lines. I have a study open on one of my tabs, but I have so many tabs open in my laptop. But, as far as educational savings accounts, there is a recent article by the California Policy Center, and the majority of minorities, when I say minorities like Blacks and Hispanics, they support educational savings accounts. And I believe, I might have the percentages mixed up, but I believe 54% of Hispanics support it. I think 71% Blacks support it. So like when we're talking about like discrimination, I don't know what you're talking about, because majority of minorities actually support school choice across. And this is specific and unique to California as well.
Yeah,
that's going to put the Democrats in a tight position as we get, it might take a couple elections to see how it actually plays out, but I think it'll put them in a tough position between the unions and their voters. We're not going to see it play out next year's election, but maybe we will, but I don't think statewide. I think you'll see it in the smaller races, but eventually it'll catch up statewide. Because it's a top issue, probably the top issue for most voters is education, I think, next year.
And I also want to note too that Governor Newsom, I think he might have signed it, but I know for sure it passed the Assembly and the Senate, and I don't know if Newsom has signed it just yet, if he vetoed it or not, but I do know that potentially in law there is going to be critical race theory required, or ethnic studies is going to be required, for all public schools in California. So whoever is running for office, they definitely, I'm not sure, within the parameters of their job description, what they can or cannot do, but I do think it has to be a pivotal issue that every candidate, whether it's assembly, whether it's for Congress or even local wide, that has to be addressed, because that is going to be something that's in law technically coming up next year.
Mm-hmm. So Cynthia, you had listed like 5 things specific to California, which I think are 5 great things to talk about in California. And this is my personal public opinion, is that I just don't think like Republicans talk enough about solutions to specific California problems. And if you're ever going to win like a state assembly seat or a state senate seat, I don't think they frame their argument or frame their platform well enough to get to voters and say, here's the positives of voting for me, as opposed to I'm just not a Democrat. So do you see that as like something that, especially on the local level, Brian's running for Congress, 3,000 miles away, but on the local level, do you think they need to do a better job of pushing and making that argument for the local issues?
100%. And I think it has to be imperative that they do so. And the reason I say that is because of my background is in grassroots activism, in particular in Southern California, but I know I can speak openly for San Diego. San Diego is like, it is a purple, it's a battleground county. So that being said, when I go to these different activism events, you never know who you're surrounded by. I've never openly asked who people voted for. When I stood out and gouged fingers for the recall and, for school choice, it's never a topic at all who they voted for. As long as they are in support of the cause that I'm in support of, that is all that matters to me. I'm not interested in shaming people, like what they thought of before, if they changed their mind or not. So that being said, when it comes to these key issues, I think that definitely has to be, at the forefront in contrast to someone's party lines, because first of all, you don't want to create an assumption. And then second of all, you could potentially lose out on someone that is in a position now that is more open-minded to not consider party lines and actually focus at the issue. And I think we saw that with the recall itself, for Kevin Kiley's campaign, when there was any kind of educational town halls. I was always a part of it because school choice is my number one political cause that I will die on the Hill for. And I had the opportunity to be on these Zoom calls. And one of the questions that one of the panelists asked, like, hey, Kevin, this is full of Democrats and, so they're considering voting for Republican for the first time. What would be your pitch to them? So that being said, I think it is a pivotal time where, I think if anyone is considering local office, instead of focusing on party lines, to focus on those issues that, are important, to the community itself. And if I had to pick like a, bullet point, it would be those 5 points.
Brian, any thoughts?
Well, we keep on thinking about local office, and it's just making me think about when I was putting out some of that stuff. I kind of am sidetracked by seeing that also Major Williams is copying Rihanna's t-shirt. Anyways, the Democrats are really good right now, statewide and in local races, at really preparing candidates for their first run. And the Republican Party is awful. They are killing candidates' chances in their first run because they're still trying to help the people that have been there forever. And that have done a lot of damage to our chances to win. So, I ran for Congress in 2020 and I learned a lot. And you oftentimes have to take a couple punches before you know what the heck you're doing in any profession, or anything, especially politics, where you're, being thrown out there in front of people. So when we're talking about local candidates, we have to kind of think about, you're talking about, hey, maybe reaching out to independents, I think is what Cynthia was kind of alluding to, with some of the messaging. We have to think about how we really help these candidates in their first time running, because they don't get the help of the party. And someone made a comment in the comment section, we need to pick one Republican and get behind that one. And I'm just so tired of hearing that now. I was one of them during the recall because I was really worried that like somebody like Paffrath would have a chance, but it doesn't matter unless we had question one. And in a lot of these primaries, we need to pick the right candidate, and the voters can only pick that. So, that people are trying to get groups like the OCGOP, and I'm sure there'll be a movement, whether it be in my race or other races, of trying to get an establishment character or a DC funded candidate or a Sacramento funded candidate through, while we have primaries, and there's no reason to do it. You have a primary, respect the will of the voters. So, anyways, that's just a sidebar of where my thought process has been, just school board, local races, looking at the disaster that happened in Huntington Beach, and looking at some of these other cities as well. I think we have to have, that we could have a whole podcast, 3-hour conversation about how do we help younger, not maybe necessarily, usually they're younger candidates. A lot of the people I see, but newer candidates, I guess, is the better term because they're not always younger. How do we help them? Because it's hard to put yourself in the headspace of running until you see like results. Like even in the recall, like we all thought it was going to be different, but how do we get better at guessing what we have to do to help some of these people their first time running, or the people not necessarily don't want to run? Maybe they want to be activists or they want to help in other ways. How do we get them in positions to help? Like we don't have conversations about that. We have like big, broader conversations about bears with John Cox and
Major Williams stealing logos and t-shirts.
Which it's the stuff that gets us the views, right? And it kind of maybe sometimes more interesting for us to talk about, but it's not always maybe the most productive. When I'm assuming I'm fortunate enough to serve. I almost said when. I don't want to sound too confident and cocky here. If I'm fortunate to serve, I'd like to help a lot of the candidates that are trying to run for city council. And as a candidate running for Congress, you can pivot from a primary into a general and really help with that. You're in a unique position, but that's obviously 7-8 months down the road right now from where you can even start thinking about that. But I think having conversations about that, and I think you'll probably have more people running for local and state office on your show over the next year, if I had to guess. I think maybe thinking about that more of like, how do you get to that threshold of how many votes they need, or just getting their message out in a way that's captivating?
Yeah, I think that's always often overlooked is just your representatives in state assembly or state senate. And I would venture to guess a lot of people didn't even know the names of their county supervisors before COVID happened. But now you have people who can rattle off all 5 or 6 of them right away and be like, I know everyone, and I know what their party affiliation is, and I know how they vote. And I get a lot of people who reach out to me on Instagram and messages, and they say, well, how can I get involved? What should I run for? And I always try and tell them, like, start small. If this is your first time in politics, like, start small, run for school board, run for something that you can get your feet wet. Don't try and go for the Hail Mary and be like, well, I need to run for governor. School board position is just as important as anything else, as we're starting to see now with all the different votes on what's going on in schools and requirements for students and teachers. I'm not going to say the word because we're on YouTube. But yeah, those are real issues that I know I want to focus on it going into 2022 on this platform, is focus on highlighting a lot of those local politicians who are running, and like, how do you get involved and how do you get there? So 2 more things, and then I want to open it up to comments and questions. I'll let you guys think about this second question. The second question I'm going to ask is, are there any races that you're looking forward to or interested in? Brian, this would include not your race specifically, any other race besides your own. So think about that one. And I was just looking at some of the propositions that were submitted and some that are going to be, that were cleared already for signature. And I thought some of them were pretty interesting. So I'm just going to list off some of them. Prohibit slavery and involuntary servitude is one that has to do with like prison inmates, because they usually try and make them clean up highways and stuff like that. Education Savings Account Initiative, which we've talked about. Prohibit public sector unions initiative. Electronic signatures for initiative for referendum. Legalize sports betting seems to be really popular, and I can understand why, because it's all over. Changes to police unions, qualified immunity, excessive force laws, water supply infrastructure. Cynthia, I think you brought that up. Some other tax assessment and local zoning stuff that doesn't sound super exciting. Voter ID is on as a proposition. It's been submitted by Carl DeMaio. I did not know that until
It's got
literally
these all have
ran
the
it.
signatures. Is that what you're saying?
So the ones that I just listed off have been filed with the Attorney General. And there's the only one that's been cleared for signature gathering is Prohibit Slavery and Involuntary Servitude. And the only ones that are on the ballot right now are legalized sports betting on American Indian lands, canceled. That's not politically correct. Changes to medical malpractice lawsuits, plastic waste reduction regulations initiative, and then flavored tobacco products ban referendum are the only ones that are on the ballot right now. So
that's a lot. And I if I had to put my money on it, maybe half of them will actually get the signatures if we're lucky. That would be a high number even. The voter ID law one, do you have wording on that? Is there any?
Yeah, let's see. Also, this just happened like 2 days ago. Add medical rights to state constitution, prohibit fluoridation, and provide vaccine exemptions initiative. So that's on there as well. But let's look at voter identification. The ballot measure would require voters to present valid and current driver's license or government issued identification card to vote in person. To vote by mail, the voters will be required to provide a valid and current driver's license or government issued ID and have their signature match the signature on file with the voter registration.
How would they do that?
So there's full text. I'm pulling it up, but
so we're gonna send in pictures of our IDs. And this is the kind of thing that I don't trust the mail in general. Like there's so many. I guess it's better than the system we got, but
so there you go. Voter identification is on the ballot for everyone who.
Well, it's not on the ballot. It's on the list. It's essentially on the ballot.
Yeah, the Reform Carl DeMaio group. I mean, Reform California. All right. Any other ones that catch your eye? Legalized sports betting sounds like fun. I like putting a couple bucks on a football game here and there. Who doesn't? And yeah, anything catch your eye? Anybody?
Well, I'm all in for my own proposition because that's going to be my focus for 6 months as soon as we get the approval. I think it might have been the other school choice proposition, the one for that I'm personally advocating for. It's California for school choice, and the bill is Educational Freedom Act. So I don't know. I know that the Secretary of State has a language deadline, October 12th. So, I'm not sure if that was on that list that you shared. I know I just recognized the other one, but that's going to be my focus personally for that. I think, yeah, all the other ones sounded good. I didn't know about the voter ID one. So that's great to hear. I know there's going to be a water one coming up as well.
Yeah, I think they're going to propose the name change on the school choice to "Why do you hate poor public school teachers and want to take their jobs?" Act. Totally not serious.
I think for the voter, I don't know. I'd have to see how they're actually going to conduct it. Anything's better than what we got now, but if we were to have a system where you had to verify your vote by mail status every 2 to 4 years or however we wrote it, I would actually even be okay with that, because then, maybe you have to send something back, kind of when you have to log into your bank and it asks for a text message to get in. Maybe that's how it should be in order to vote by mail. Hey, you got something in the mail, you want to vote by mail, send this back. Otherwise you have to vote in person. I don't know about sending. I don't know. I obviously he could get in some. The measure could get in some trouble if it's too vague about how do you show your ID, or however, if you're voting by mail. I'm a little curious about that. You had asked about some of the races. If you want me to jump in with some that I'm interested in.
Yeah, go ahead.
The Virginia governor's race, not that it's California related, but I think that's going to have potentially some impact. Some people are thinking that Republicans can actually somehow pull that one out. That would be an indicator that all these other seats are in play across the country and in California. It would probably solidify my seat as a real conservative seat. You'd have people starting to throw in more money. even if it's close, because like Virginia's thought is like a lost cause to some people. And then if you look at Orange County, some of these Orange County races, I think these two supervisor races we have with Foley's seat, she's the Democrat that took Michelle Steele's seat with that special election in January. That'll be interesting to watch. And then you'll have Lisa Bartlett, who's termed out. And that'll also be interesting to watch because there's going to be kind of an internal battle within the Republican Party to see who they try to pick in that. Not only that race, but maybe even my race, which I don't expect to necessarily always get them on board, even in this, because they don't like that I tell it like it is. So it'll be interesting in that. And in the assembly races, it's going – and our party, in Orange County, I think it has like a 50% endorsement success rate. So it's not, it's oftentimes kiss of death in a lot of ways. That's a really bad rate of success, especially when it's in a lot of local races that are winnable. In terms of bigger races, other than that, I can't think of any besides that Petrie Norris. I think it's 74th Assembly District. It was a winnable race in 2020, and it should have been won, and it wasn't. But I'm trying to think of any other races statewide. There's nothing statewide. It'll be interesting to see how somebody like Eric Early can do. It'll be interesting to see how these candidates that ran in the recall navigate their political futures.
Mm-hmm.
It'll say a lot about their character and their judgment, how they go about that, honestly. Like someone like Kylie, I would be totally okay if he decided to run again, but I don't know if it really makes sense for him because it's not a winning battle, and I don't think he's really looking for. I think he jumped into this partially because he knew he had a turnout of the voters that really liked him. It'll be interesting to see what Larry Elder does. I think Elder might end up doing this again, which I didn't think. And I think we're going to see once again, I talked about like in my little races, but if it's like Faulkner and Elder and all the stuff we've been reading, it could be a messy primary. Unfortunately for all of us, because it's more infighting, which is not what we really need.
Yeah, but real quick before Cynthia, we jump to you and your prediction or what you're going to keep an eye on. People in the chat, if you want to start posting questions for the group, we'll get to those after our what we're going to be watching for races. So, Cynthia, what are you looking for? What races are you going to keep an eye on in 2022 besides Brian's?
Yes. So I got involved with the San Diego Republican Party this year. And I think, to kind of emphasize Brian's point on as far as, if there's people watching that are considering running for office, I do recommend you get involved in your local Republican Party because, if you run as a Republican, you're going to need, your local endorsement through their central committee meeting. And I know one thing that they consider for that endorsement is if you've been around the party and if you've been involved and, if you've donated before, those are just little things. So if you're thinking of running for office in 2022, start planting those seeds now because, it's not too late now to do that. So that being said, within San Diego, I'm definitely eager to watch, the school board trustee elections. Also eager to watch, county board of supervisor. I know in San Diego, we have a really big activism community. So we have a lot of watchdogs on, 2 county supervisors. As far as outside of that, I'm a casual observer of Texas politics, just because one of the organizations I'm part of, Latinos for America First, is based in Texas. So when there was some districts that were flipped red and they had a special election, that was a big deal because my group was a big part of that, being grassroots. And some of the issues that they had spoken about were the border, and that ended up that district flipped Republican for the first time in decades because of that issue alone. And I know my group's really active, making sure they have a new governor. So that's just, my leisure is casually observing that. For California, there's 2 congressional races aside from Brian that I'm interested in and that I am going to be a big part of and volunteering for. One is Tamika Hamilton. She's running for the House of Representatives in District 3 in California. And then Richard Bailey, he's running in District 52 in California. Outside of that, one other U.S. House of Representatives candidate that I like a lot is Joe Kent. He's running to replace an incumbent named Jamie Herrera Butler. And, of course, for me, one thing that I always emphasize on, regardless of what the recall was, our state assembly is way more important than our governor. So I'm definitely going to be, watchdog on, the state assembly seats, which one is flippable, along with our California Senate races as well. I volunteered for a special election for a state assembly when Shirley Weber got appointed for Secretary of State. There was a vacancy in District 79. So I volunteered for the lone Republican, Marco Contreras. Unfortunately, Akilah Weber won that election. So being behind the scenes of an election, really piqued my interest more so than activism. So, I'll be very busy, in these next few months in 2022, but I'm really excited for the races coming up and the candidates, including Brian's as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, you took two of my answers. Tamika, who ran a really strong race that I don't think they were expecting, and I think she's definitely a competitive district. I think she's got a real good chance to flip that. Richard Bailey going up against Scott Peters. That'll be an interesting one. See if he's running on more of like a Cal-Republican platform, but we can get into that in another episode. Yeah, I think state assembly is definitely big here locally. Melanie Burkholder, she had a strong showing last time. I think she did really well. And even though I think her opponent outspent her like 3-1 or something like that. So the fact that she was really close. Those are right now, those are the races I'm looking at. I know they're local, specifically to San Diego, but there's a lot of them, and we're going to talk about a lot of them over 2022 on this podcast. All right, let's get into some questions.
I have a quick comment before we get into questions. I put it in the private chat. I don't know if you guys saw it. December 27th or sooner, the redistricting maps will come out. That's really important. I think my district, I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything, but it's one to watch because it impacts other districts. If you look at Mike Garcia's seat, rumor is they're trying to cut out Mike Garcia's seat, which because most of the population loss was in LA County. And then my seat's overpopulated. It's like the only seat that's overpopulated. So they have to carve. My seat's actually going to shrink on the map, which is kind of hard to believe because you think you're losing a seat statewide. But no, like we have Irvine's has grown so much. Our district's overpopulated. So in order to ensure equality of population, we're going to have to give like young Kim and Michelle Steele maybe some more of the liberal parts of the district. So it's going to be a really unique, like what if UCI gets what if I lose part of UCI, which is more liberal, obviously it's a university, and how does that impact the election? So keep an eye on those two districts, and then also how they're going to redraw the assembly districts. That'll be interesting to see as well.
Yeah, certainly. All right. Any comments or questions I'm looking at right now? Let's see. Someone had asked, can you add on the ballot a finance class for graduating seniors or requirement high schoolers don't understand financial issues? Yeah, I mean, if you want to organize the proposition, you could certainly get basically anything on the ballot.
Yeah, I just don't know how that works with how local districts handle their end of the curriculum.
But that would also be assuming that you want to enact a law that would be for public schools, and we're trying to get more school choice and get people out of public schools too.
I was talking to someone when I was in DC about defunding schools that participate in critical race theory. Since a lot of that's public funding from the federal government, I think that's coming. which is kind of like a weird spot. Of course, as a conservative, you have the federal government stepping in, but also the federal government's already funding this, so it's the federal government allocating its resources based on what the majority opinion would be in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. Obviously, Biden's not going to sign any of that, but just something to think about. You can really get anything done if you have the numbers, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Someone asked, how can we break party loyalty? I'm wondering, does that mean party loyalty for Democrats or which one specifically? But I'm assuming it means for Democrats. How do you break party loyalty?
I mean, so as far as like as a party, I think, a big area of opportunity for us is, there are people. So there's people that, there's Republicans, there's no party preference, there's independents, there's libertarians, and there's Democrats. But there's also a sea of people that aren't even registered to vote. So as far as, party loyalty, there's those people that don't have any loyalty to anyone. So, I think, my opinion, I think those are people that we can specifically plant some seeds on that as well. As far as, party loyalty and, how to form these coalitions and win elections for Republicans, I would emphasize, again, focusing on really key specific policies that are unique for your community. If you're in California, running on those 5 bullet points, which are school choice, homelessness, the rise of crime, so the public safety, the environment, and the high cost of living, because that really transcends all party lines and would break party loyalty. That's just my take on that.
Okay.
With our current approach to politics, we'll never break the Democratic Party's loyalty in California. We're talking too much about the how to vote and not enough on the why. I don't know any why you would vote for a Republican statewide based on the last recall. I wasn't given a really good reason. I think Elder maybe gave some about school choice, but I don't think his was even strong enough. We didn't get to really see his independent and Democratic outreach, which I thought he had some good messaging if he would have actually gotten to that point, but it's hard to do when you have 8 weeks and you're just trying to fundraise. So I think we have to get away from the vote by mail versus voting in person versus the drop box discussion and get back to the why are you going to vote for a conservative, which gets back to the reason that I was talking about, which is more of like the Reagan which is now maybe more the modern day libertarian approach to government. I think Californians can actually resonate with that message regardless of their party.
Okay. Well, it looks like that's it for the comments and questions. We'll finish up letting you both plug where people can reach you or contact you or support you in Brian's case. So ladies first, Cynthia, where can people find you, reach you, contact you, all that stuff?
Sure. And I want to thank you, Phil, for inviting me. And Brian, it was really nice to be a part of this panel. I had a really great conversation. I felt like it was very productive. And I think, we covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. And I think there's a lot more we could discuss another time. But I thought it was a really great time. So thank you both. So you can look me up on Instagram and Twitter. If you just type in my name, it's a really unique name, so I should pop up. But I do have my username on there on Twitter. On Instagram, it's the same, except there's a dot, in between my first and my last name. If you want to learn more about the school choice initiative that I'm going to be helping to spearhead, the website is californiaschoolchoice.org. Again, it's californiaschoolchoice.org. On that website, it goes into really in depth about what our initiatives. So if you go on the top of the website, there's a button called Initiative, and you get to read the entire bill in its entire language. We also have an FAQ going over anything about, what specifically the bill is going to cover and things of that nature. And we also do have a list of politicians. We have a wall of fame and a wall of shame of, people, in particular that are for school choice and who aren't. So you can kind of get a peek at that. Kevin Kiley in particular supports our specific initiative. But other than that, that's all, I hope.
Great. And Brian, where can everybody go to support you in your race for Congress?
Well, the campaign website's brianburley.com. It's Brian with an I, Burley. I always have to spell it because people always think it's with a Y. You can follow me on there with our campaign in terms of like official political stances and volunteer and contribute however you want to help us. Get a free lawn sign if you're in the district. Other than that, it's just Burley for Congress, the number 4, Burley for Congress on social media. My social media is more personal stuff unless you're in the district. So like kind of the discussions we're doing here, I don't really get, or it's about my dogs. So if you want to watch me and my dogs, that's what you'll be doing on my personal one. But I want to thank you guys for, Phil, it's always great to hop on and have discussions with you. And Cynthia, it's good to, I know we messaged before. It's good to, it's not 3D, but I guess it's technically 3D, but not in person 3D. It's via camera. I don't know what that dimension is. I hope I didn't lose any votes for that. But yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Someone had just commented, pets are a big thing. Have a dog or cat in your ad. So if you follow Brian, you see both his dogs running along the beach or being over dramatic as they are. So yeah, thank you guys for coming on. We'll definitely have a lot more to talk about in 2022. I think we covered a lot of stuff tonight. We probably could have kept talking for a couple more hours, but then we would have been putting everyone to sleep. But because it's late at night and we're talking about in-depth politics, not because we're boring or you guys are boring. I'm saying that it's really deep, heavy stuff.
Facts.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about like Major Williams gossip, which keeps everyone up and on the edge of their seat. But yeah, thank you for coming on. I'm sure we'll have more roundtable discussions in 2022 if you guys want to come back and talk more. And as always, you guys know where to find me, California Underground, Coffee and California Politics, every Wednesday at 9 a.m. And the podcast is every Thursday night. So with that said, have a good night, everybody, and we'll talk to you on the next one. Later.